Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Recovery Support Services RSS Echo series. This training is brought to you by the Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring CSTAT, a division of the Be Well Institute here at University of Texas, San Antonio. My name is Andrea, and I will be helping to facilitate this conversation today. Before we start, I want to remind you that this session is being recorded for later distribution. However, the information that you see on the chat will not appear on the recordings. So please enter your names, email addresses, and affiliations on the chat so we can confirm your attendance to this session. If you're joining via phone, that's not a problem. Just send us an email at cstat@utesca.edu so we can associate your phone numbers with your names. And today we're going to start with a didactic presentation by Dr. Hernandez. He is also part of our hub, and he will be presenting on enhancing support through peer in-reach in jail and prison settings. That didactic will be followed by your questions and comments. And then we're going to have Johnny Hatton presenting a case very much related to the didactics. And that's the part of the session in which we really encourage your participation. Please raise your hands. Remember, echoes are the space of all teach, all learn, and that means that all of us in this space are experts and learners at the same time. So it's your participation what makes these sessions different from any other trainings. So please take part in the conversation. And we're going to start right now with some introductions from our hub experts. And Kim Govak, welcome to the session. How are you today?
I'm wonderful, Andrea. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Govak. I'm a National Certified Peer Recovery Specialist. I live in New Jersey. I'm a hub member, and I'm grateful to be here with you today. Oh, Woman in Sustained Recovery Management. Don't let me forget that.
Very important. Thank you. Johnny Hatton, our case presenter, would you introduce yourself briefly, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Johnny Hatton. I am a state certified recovery support peer specialist and reentry peer specialist with Abilene Recovery Council. I've been doing this work now for a little more than 10 years and, always glad to join these conversations.
It's always nice to have you, Johnny. Thank you for presenting a case for us today. And I think we can move to Dr. Hernandez. If you could please introduce yourself, and at the same time, let's start sharing the PowerPoint didactics. And we're ready. All right, we see this.
Can you hear me?
Perfect. We see it and we can hear you. Thank you.
Right. So once again, thank you and welcome all the good people who are doing great work on the ground to humanize and support our people in many facets of their lives. My name is Hernandez. I am from Puerto Rico. I live in Massachusetts. I've lived here for a very long time. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself, and the topic today is enhancing support through peer in-reach in jail and prison settings. So I'm going to introduce myself and tell you a little bit more about some stuff that I think is relevant to the topic area. And then I'm going to begin to present, and I'm going to invite you in to ask questions, to push back, to provide feedback as we go through the presentation. So I don't want to wait until the end to be able to do that. I prefer a conversation with you as opposed to a conversation at you. So coming back to this piece here, and please raise your virtual hand. I'll just call on you. I'm going to also make it my business to monitor the chat as much as possible, and we can go from there. Again, I am from Puerto Rico. I live in Massachusetts. I've worked in the field of health and human services with a specific focus on substance use, mental health, HIV, Hep C, and related areas for the last, in December, it'll be 38 years. I've worked in inpatient settings, outpatient settings with folks experiencing incarceration. In community settings is where I thrive the most and where I learn the most. As you can see from my name, I have more letters after my name than letters in my name. I'm a certified prevention specialist. I'm certified and licensed as an addictions counselor. And I was introduced as Dr. Hernandez because I do have a PhD. You need to also understand that I also have a GED, and my GED I earned in prison. And it was more challenging to earn a GED in prison than a PhD out here. We're going to be talking about jails and prisons and what that looks like regarding peer work. But I want you to know that I'm a person who identifies as being in long-term recovery. And that for me means that I haven't used a drug, including alcohol, for the last, on December 20th of this year, to be 39 years. I was told when I was in my teens that I wouldn't live to be 18. And here I am at 61, alive and well, and still learning. Um, Being in recovery enables me to be a productive member of my familia, first and foremost, to never have to go back to prison or jail as a person who was sent there by the courts. These days, when I go into a prison or a jail, it's because I want to, and I want to get back and I want to participate. Um, and, that enables me to be present here with you today and to continue to learn about many different things as I move forward. I have had the pleasure of having and continuing to have really good mentors in my life. All of that, I think, is relevant to this topic area and my trajectory there. And once again, I want to encourage you to ask any questions or pushback, feedback that you might have going throughout. In terms of disclosures here, all of the speakers and members of the planning committee have no relevant financial relationships with commercial interests to disclose here. And the views expressed here do not necessarily reflect the official views of the University of Texas Health San Antonio, the Department of Health and Human Services, or Texas Health and Human Services, nor does not, hold on, I'm having technical difficulties here, or does not mention trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement of by the U.S. or Texas government. So those are the disclosures that I want to put out there, or that we want to put out there. The learning objectives for today, hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be able to describe the role of peers in the field of substance use disorders, explain how peers can embrace recovery and reentry services for people with substance use disorders, and then compare and contrast different resources for peers who work in reentry services. And for peers who work in the community in general, I would add to that. So those are the learning objectives. Wanted to begin here with a historical overview, very brief, but a very important one. And this is all about the emergence of people with lived and living experiences in our field. As early as the 17th century, we're talking about the 1600s, Native peoples across this continent were providing support to each other around challenges with primarily alcohol as it was introduced on this continent. And so it's important to understand that piece of it. In the 19th century, mutual aid groups such as Alcoholics Anonymous provided peer guidance and supports. Let us not forget that part of that historical piece is that no one really wanted to work with people experiencing substance use or alcohol issues at that point in time. So it was a group of people who were experiencing those issues actively or were in the process of getting better, who came together and said, if no one's going to do this for us, we're going to do it ourselves. So we have to build this system of care. And so 100% of the people who developed our field were people who were in need of care or were in the process of getting better, or what we call today in recovery processes, right? That's 100%. People are in recovery after, this whole launch of this field and way of doing things were hired in many different roles, including temperance missionaries, managers of homes where people went to get better and receive services. Um, and in the early 20th century, we saw lay alcoholism therapists, they were called at the time, and friendly visitors. So these are folks, again, with lived and living experience who came in to work with folk. Now, all of you who work with people who are experiencing recovery or wellness or both, many of them start to say, I want to give back. I want to give back. That is connected to purpose, right? Giving back is connected to purpose. And people believe that if I help somebody else, it's going to help me, right? And so it's an opportunity for us to engage with people in creating spaces and places where they can come in and give back. In the early 2000s, and we're not talking a long time ago, we see a formal launch of recovery coaching, right? We see recovery coaches, recovery mentors, recovery support specialists, and this is driven by the recovery movement. Don't be fooled for 1 second that other folks led this charge. It was people in recovery saying, no, the experiences of people seeking help in recovery are important to this work for many different reasons, right? And so curriculums were written, opportunities were provided, funding followed from state, federal, local sources, and we are where we are today because of all of this movement. Fast forward to today, when this movement of peers participating happened, everybody in the field had lived experience or living experience. Fast forward to today, less than 40% of people who work in the field have lived or living experience. I point that out because how have we gotten to that space? First and foremost, I want to say this. You don't need to have lived or living experience to be able to help people. We know that, right? So we work with a lot of allies who are not people in recovery, and they do really good work. Yet the reality is that somehow, some way in this process, we pushed people out who were willing to participate in this field. And now we're coming back full circle to try to bring those people in. And in carceral settings, this is happening as well. So that is one piece of this thing that I want to bring in. The definition of peer is important to center here. Peer support workers are people who have been successful in the recovery process, who help others experiencing similar situations or challenges. Through shared understanding, respect, and mutual empowerment, peer support workers help people become and stay engaged in the recovery process or processes and reduce the likelihood of a relapse, which we now call recurrence, as opposed to relapse, but this is SAMHSA's terminology, not mine. Peer support services can effectively extend the reach of treatment beyond the clinical setting into the everyday environment of those seeking a successful, sustained recovery process. Now, notice a couple of things about this definition, right? We're talking about peers and their role. It says peer support services can effectively extend reach of treatment beyond. I just want to remind us that it's not just about treatment. It's about the multiple pathways of wellness and recovery. Not everybody who is in recovery went to treatment. It's important to understand that. 12-step is not treatment. Faith-based processes for many people are not treatment. There are many pathways of recovery that are not treatment, and we need to have a broader understanding of what this looks like, right? And I always include wellness and recovery because there's a certain segment of the population who don't identify with the term recovery. There's 23 million people in the country who identify as being in recovery from a substance use disorder, but there's plenty of people who do not, and that is okay as far as I'm concerned. What I'm concerned about is how is your process going and how can I support you? You don't need to define yourself the way that I define myself, right? Um, so there has been a lot of training and credentialing that has been put out for folks in our field uh, and wanting to become, recovery coaches or recovery mentors or whatever that piece is. But there are credentials for those things, and not everybody wishes to have a credential or strives for a credential. But for those who do, there are some minimum requirements, right? One of those happens to be a high school diploma, like the one that I got in prison. Uh, they must have personal lived or living experience of substance use disorders in our field. The mental health field also has credentialing processes there, and their requirements are somewhat similar to ours. Um, in some places, and this varies, you must demonstrate a period of personal recovery, often 1 to 2 years. Now, I know spaces and places who've hired people with 6 months, and some people who want people to have more recovery time under their belts. But for the most part, people are talking 1 to 2 years. Wherever you land on that is wherever you land on that. There are folks who believe that people with lived and living experience can come into this field and help people right away. The reason why I mentioned lived and living experience is because there are centers who hire people who are actively using to educate their peers to to um, to help them understand ways of not getting infected with HIV or hepatitis C, that sort of thing. So there's that to take into account. And then there's training that's required, right? The completion of state-approved peer support specialists include the role of, I keep having difficulty with this, including the role of peers, multiple pathways of recovery, recovery capital, ethics and boundaries, and many others. And so in the state where I live in, we have an ICNRC board, which is the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium. They require 30 hours. Our state added 60, added an additional 30 hours. So our total hours are 60. And so you must go into your state credentialing body and figure out what is it that they're requiring by way of formal training. And then there's certification, right? It's at the national level, it's at the state level, and it requires that people take and pass a written exam, which is a part of the challenge for many peers who haven't had positive experiences with formal education. And when you mention exams, people cringe at that. But training and credentialing is available for folks in the field. And then there's a professional code of conduct that people need to sign and agree to adhere to as they become credentialed, right? As they become credentialed. There's some stuff in the chat. Let me see if there's anything there for me to be looking at.
I don't see
Okay.
anything, but I
All
will
right.
let you know.
All right. Thank you for that. So that's in terms of training and credentialing. Now, peers in carceral settings. And I want to make sure that I leave enough time for questions, comments, feedback, that sort of thing. Lived experience. So, people who have been trained as peers, it's not that we are encouraged to talk about ourselves all the time. It's that we use our lived and living experience to connect, to educate, to convey hope, to demonstrate what is possible, and engage people in recovery processes. So that's why I told you about my experience with not just having a PhD, but a GED. That conveys hope. That conveys right information. I am not just talking about myself because I like to do that. It is because there's a connection to hopefully helping people who are in front of us. And so if the question should be, am I saying this because it's going to help me, or is it because it's going to help the people in front of me? If the latter is the case, then we're sharing personal information for the right reason. Understand that this is different from the clinical field, where clinicians and people who provide clinical services are encouraged not to share about themselves in a personal way. In terms of collaborative partnerships, peers work with cultural staff to enhance the quality of services and improve outcomes for the people that we serve. So it's a collaborative relationship, right? That we engage with folks who are working behind the wall. In terms of providing direct support, the peers provide individual and or group support to the folks that we work with who have substance use issues, right? So we can work at the individual level and we can work at the group level as well. In terms of engagement, we help individuals engage in behavioral health services and support the development of recovery plans. This is different from clinical settings that focus on clinical treatment plans, right? Peers are non-clinical people, first and foremost. We use lived and living experience to help people develop recovery capital, reduce barriers to recovery, and engage in whatever recovery pathway of their choosing. That's the engagement piece, right? And then as it relates to reentry, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this, we work with people before they're released, to connect with them prior to, and many programs are set up like 3 to 6 months before people are released, and then connect them to recovery support services in the community, And some of those examples include health, housing, treatment, employment, family reunification, anything and everything that people need as it relates to reentry processes. This model is most effective when there's true integration within the carceral setting, which means that the institution has had to do the work to develop the policies, the procedures, to orient the people behind the wall of the role of peers and the integration of peers and what that looks like. So there has to be a lot of work that's done even before peers are brought in so that people understand what their role is, different from clinical roles, right? And if people don't understand the role, they begin to question or they begin to assign tasks to people that are not within the peer role. That has happened in community-based organizations, and it's also happening behind the wall unless there is this integration process, which includes policies and procedures. When the institution and the staff understand the role of the peer and the value that they bring, then that makes the outcomes that more effective. When people don't understand the role, they just think, well, that peer is just here talking about themselves, or that peer is just here to transport. Lay down. That peer is just here to transport people from point A to point B, or that, whatever those things are, they don't understand the role of the peers, then it makes it more difficult for everybody, including the peers, including the institution, those sorts of things. The peer voice is extremely important. When the peer voice is respected and taken into account when making decisions about the person in need of humanization, dignity, and respect and recovery, then the work is more effective, right? And so I work with folks who work within carceral settings where they want to hear from peers, and they want to hear because peers have been in those spaces and places, and they know what it's taken them to come out into society in a more productive way. And so when that voice is amplified and respected, then outcomes are also amplified and put forth. We need to make sure that people are receiving ongoing, quality, non-clinical supervision for peers in any setting, but we're talking about carceral settings, right? Here. And so we need to understand what the role is, and the role is not clinical, so the supervision needs to be there. We need to make sure that supervision is done in a way that takes into account that these are people with lived and living experience that might be themselves experiencing some type of stress or anxiety because they're coming back behind the wall in a different capacity, but behind the wall nonetheless, right? And that there's ongoing support, that we take the time and care to understand what it is like for a person who was once incarcerated to now be providing services behind the wall, and the support that is needed and required to support people in those situations. And then that all of this requires community partnerships. Nothing that we can't be all things to all people. And so we need to have formal collaborations with folk in the community who are providing services. By formal, I mean memorandums of agreement or memorandums of understanding that are signed by the carceral setting with the community-based settings in terms of what we're going to do and what you committing to doing as it relates to reentry and reentry services. Before we come into some discussion, some questions here, I want to leave you with a quote centering once again the voices of people with living experience. This is what one participant said to me. I was always in and out of jail, you know. The last time I was there, I connected with a recovery coach and my entire experience changed. I was finally able to talk to someone who understood me because they had been where I was at. That recovery coach cared for me and connected me to the services that I needed when I came home. I am so grateful. You just don't know what that did for me. I am never going back there. This to me speaks to the power of people with lived and living experience, the power of those people with lived and living experience working in partnership with people in carceral settings, as well as working with partnership with community-based settings in terms of humanizing people, bringing people back in, addressing the trauma that people have experienced while incarcerated and before then, addressing institutionalization, right? And people with lived and living experience knows what that looks like, institutionalization, and helping people to connect to their pathway of recovery of their preference, not mine. My pathway is the best pathway for Janet Hernandez, not for anybody else. People get to choose whatever their pathway is. My role, once again, is to help people connect with whatever that pathway is and to support that. And if I cannot support a particular pathway, I should get out of the way and make a referral to someone who can, but not to obstruct people's way of getting better. I'm going to stop my share here. We have a few minutes for questions, comments, feedback, pushback, anything you want to provide here. Dr. Kristen, please come in. Clancy.
So, howdy, New Jersey. I'm going to show up as New York City Irish Kristen right now. And yeah, I do have doctor in front of my name and a bunch of initials afterwards, and it doesn't mean anything. A lot of meetings that I go to, I'm the only person with lived experience. I celebrated 10 years freedom from fentanyl in November of last year, and I'm about to hit a November, and I am just a kid doing this work. And thank you for all the hearts and stuff. I completed, and we're gonna talk after this. I completed a 1-year fellowship that was NIH and NIDA funded through the University of Massachusetts Medical School, specifically on improving outcomes for people that are incarcerated. And I will admit to you that I stayed out of jail and prison because I am a white girl. I want to hear in your work the differences you have seen between white people and people of color, because I don't do direct services. I do administration, but we don't talk about that enough. And I have had a lot of federal funding cut for the immigrant population that I signed up to serve. My My family lived in Venezuela for 10 years, and they were there when the floods killed 40,000 people, and they were there when the military overthrew the government, and they were missing for days, and it was my job to find them, and I was a 24-year-old kid. Like, I get why people come here, and it hurts me that there is such a discrepancy right now between the white population and people of color. And I want to hear your perspectives on that. And thank you. Sorry, I'm emotional. It hurts me.
Don't apologize for being emotional. And thank you for all the work that you're doing on the ground and for introducing yourself and raising some really important issues. There's something called differential impact, and all we need to do is to take a look at the data in terms of who's incarcerated and why, and the policies that drive incarceration in the country. And it paints a very clear picture. And then we have seen the impacts on the other side of that of what they look like. And so, yes, right now we are in an environment that makes it more difficult for some people to speak out than others about certain issues. And that's sort of the space that we're in. And it's very challenging for many people to say some things out loud. Having said that, I will say this: the research and the outcomes and the data show that when we work with people to humanize them, to treat them with dignity and respect, to provide access for all people, um, regardless of who they are and what they look like and what they practice, that outcomes are improved. I'll give you an example of New York State. Um, when the largest crime bill in US history, 1994, was passed, a lot of programs behind the wall were eliminated, including the ones that allowed people to get a degree or to take college classes when they were behind the wall. New York didn't eliminate those programs entirely, and they reduced recidivism rates by 80% of people who came in contact with post-secondary education behind the wall before they came out. That is a huge number, right? That is a huge number. And we have pockets of programs that are still doing that across the country. And right now we have a lot of peers who are working behind the wall. Not everybody who's behind the wall gets access to reentry services, but we know when there are reentry services available that provide the multiple pathways of recovery and support people in reentry processes, that recidivism rates can be reduced doing that work. And so that's the space that we live in. That's the space that I live in terms of looking at what is possible. I told you earlier, someone said to me, listen, I didn't drop out of high school. I was pushed out of middle school. Let's start with that. And a group of people told me I wouldn't live to be 18. And I got my GED in prison, and I came out with the right mentors, with the right people around me, and they supported me in this process. And like you and your story, there are many, many, many other stories of hope and success. We need to double down and do more in the face of what we're currently facing in the country. I hope I did your question some justice. I noticed another hand that went up. We have a couple of minutes, just 2 minutes before we need to wrap up.
Dr. Hen, this
Yes,
is
please come
Dorothy
in.
West,
Mhm.
calling out of Houston. Yes. Let me see if I can get my camera on. I was driving. So I appreciate, let me see here. There we go.
We see
Yes.
you, Dorothy.
I
Thank you.
appreciate you. Oh, wonderful. I've had to pull over, guys. But any which way, real quickly, I do appreciate you sharing today. And Dr. Clancy, I also appreciate you sharing. And my heart goes out to our present state of our country right now. But as a recovery support specialist, as a supervisor in this field, I'd really like for us to understand that this is an ongoing social issues that didn't just start. And, you know, discrepancies in services or service provision of services has always been there. A lot of grants have been, structured to help underserved communities and all that. So, but for my role, I need to meet people where they're at, no matter what their race is. And I get that we have such social injustice, but I for the workforce out here, I think our concentration should lay within the person that's in front of us, those that we are serving right then and there, as we work with the other social issues and do that. But I just concerned that we get a little too emotional based on being subjected to any type of discriminatory things that has happened to us, things that we got or didn't get. Like I said, this is not new. So I just want to encourage people to do the best coaching that we can do for the people that are still suffering right here, regardless of what they're suffering from, and that we keep clear the temperature of the country, but definitely build our resources for culturally appropriate engagement to learn, continue to increase our learning to different needs of different cultures. But I think that is in the scope of recovery support, is being culturally competent to hear the need of different communities and do our best to provide those services and not get so lost in the social injustice of it all, and definitely nurture that cry inside of you, but just to deliver great recovery support is really about that person, and not to get that confused, and because they need to be consoled, and they don't need to have other people join the bandwagon, because again, you'll spend so much time talking about the injustices instead of what that person needs individually. So thank you for letting me share.
Got it. I'll close us off with this because we need to come to the case study in a moment. We all need to continue to do work at the individual level to humanize people, to bring people home safely, responsibly, all of that. And we can also work on advocacy to come up with policies that drive services in a more proficient and competent way. 3 strikes and you're out, mandatory minimums, um, criminalization of behaviors, school zones, all of those policies that came to us by way of that largest crime bill in US history, were policies that were put into place. Just like they were put into place, they can be taken out. And so we can work at many different fronts on the policy level and on the individual level to address these issues in a more comprehensive way, and not just in one way, but in many different ways. And once again, I want to thank you for your participation, for everything that you're doing on the ground. I put my email, my phone number in the chat. And if you have any additional questions or you want to keep in contact, please feel free to reach out.
All right, I am enjoying the very organic feel of this conversation. We'll certainly continue with this in the second part of this class. We're just going to move very quickly to the announcements, and then we'll go into the case. And remember that if you want to claim CEU credits for today's session, you must complete the post-session survey and answer yes on the question related to CEU credits. Your certificate of completion will be sent to you 2 weeks after this session. Remember also that it is very important for us when you answer the post-session survey, because it gives us ideas on the topics or the cases or anything related to these trainings that is useful for you. So please take some time to answer that post-session survey so we can serve you better. And remember, it will take approximately 2 weeks to receive that certificate via email. Next. The Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring CSTAD offers technical assistance for a variety of needs related to substance use disorders. If you need any type of technical assistance, just go to our page. We're sharing it with you right now on the chat, and complete the TA, technical assistant form, and we'll get back to you approximately 2 days after that. Next. And the Texas Substance Use Symposium is here again. We're so excited. Please save the date. That's March 2 and 3 at the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center here in San Antonio. Beautiful venue. We're all looking forward to this symposium this year. March 2 and 3, we'll see you here in San Antonio. Next. And of course, next month, just remember that next month, because of the Thanksgiving festivities, we are moving our session 1 week prior, because obviously none of us is going to be here on Thanksgiving week. So it's going to be Wednesday, November 19. And please be on the lookout for more information about this change of date via email. Thank you. And I think, Johnny, if you're ready, we can start sharing your case presentation. Please take your time with your case. As I said before, it's so related to our presentation today. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. First and foremost, I really want to say, thank you to Dr. Hernandez. What a wonderful presentation and a great segue into actually what I wanted to talk about. For me, like I said, I've been doing this work now, for a little more than 10 years. And, I put a lot of thought into how I represent the peers, that I work with. And, I really aim to make their experiences, as visible and meaningful as possible, even when they're not present, because I'm representing them, right? My hope is always to really capture their story in the most authentic way. And that's what I hope to really do today, is highlight this particular individual's struggles in a way that really truly reflects his journey and experiences. So, in the situation here, this participant is a 36-year-old male who is currently in residential treatment as part of a court order following a probation violation related to his use of methamphetamines. He says to me that, he began using as a teenager and has also faced, significant mental health challenges, including PTSD from early childhood trauma, related to, a lot of physical abuse that he put up with, or he endured rather. Some of his goals, in recovery include completing the treatment, securing stable transitional housing, reconnecting with mental health supports, because currently he's not able to do that, and successfully acclimating to a new community as he strives to rebuild his life. Some of the obstacles for this person that he faces are, or include identifying, mental health supports to address his PTSD beyond medication management, and really, looking to navigate the structure of the treatment facility he's at while he's off his medication, where, which is really important because, rule violations in that program where he's at can lead to extensions or even a probation revocation, which in his situation would mean prison time. So he's really trying to, overcome those obstacles. Also, as he enters the employment phase of that particular program, he will also, need to earn enough money to cover the probation fees for housing costs there at the facility, but he also have to save money for housing costs and save for transitional living and transportation as he prepares to reintegrate into the community. So those are some of the obstacles that he's facing. And then, when you're looking at in terms, we're talking about recovery capital, this participant currently has very limited recovery capital and minimal family support. He was sent to court order treatment from another county, but plans to remain in this area where, once again, he'll have to, rebuild his life and establish new personal and recovery oriented relationships. But despite these challenges, I will say he has shown resilience. He maintains a CDL that can support his employment, and has intentionally sought out recovery support services, which, in my mind, demonstrates, his determination to improve his quality of life. Um, some of the options that he and I discussed, include developing emotional regulation skills to help him better navigate the treatment facility he's currently at, while he's off his medication. Also, connecting with other residents to explore viable long-term employment opportunities as he begins his job search within that facility. And also we talked about, him working with the staff to identify transitional housing that will offer, stability and is the best fit for him as he looks to transition to a new community. Other things that he and I discussed include budgeting, engaging in local recovery groups. We went over the multiple ones that are provided here where we live at. How he can access, mental health services, but not really just mental health services, the appropriate services, for him. And really, and maintaining and him just doing what he can with our support and support that he has there at the facility to maintain a positive focus on a successful transition back into the community. And so, some questions, that I had, and you certainly to ask, you certainly, welcome to ask your own. But one thing I wanted to ask was, I wanted to mention was that, sometimes, connecting peers with mental health supports, beyond, just beyond the use of medication has been a real challenge, both in affordability and finding providers that, peers can relate to and trust to impact their experiences. So, the question that I wanted to pose was, how can we as peer supporters help bridge, this gap to assist peers in achieving, those possible outcomes? And I'll end by saying this: the reason why this piece is so important to me is because there's a gentleman named Bill Milken who started an organization called Communities in Schools. And this is a statement that I use a lot in my coaching, whether it's one-on-one or even in my public speaking. Bill Milken says that programs don't change people, relationships do. I firmly believe that. And that's why I think that's why I asked that question about how do we help, peers, get connected, with mental health supports beyond medication, that can really assist them in meeting the challenges that they're dealing with and really unpack that stuff so they can improve their quality of life. And, so yeah, that's what I have for you today. And hopefully we can have a really good discussion around that. And I will turn it back over to Andrea.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you so much. Let's open the floor for your questions and comments and suggestions for alternatives. I see Brian. Did you raise your hand? Was it Brian?
No, I was just giving an applause
Oh,
for the
okay. All
presentation.
right.
Thank you.
No problem.
So I'm not seeing my thing to raise my hand. Johnny, thank you so much for your case. This is an awesome case. And Hanel, thank you for your presentation. I guess one of the things that I was wondering is, um, I understand that he has his experiences with trying to work on his mental health. He's had some difficulty maneuvering that. Has anyone talked to him about what those past experiences were actually? And the other thing is, you had something in the discussion about the emotional regulation skills. So some of
Right.
those tools, right, that can be worked on with this gentleman are like, I see that, what do they have in there that he's already doing something. The case isn't up here again, but perhaps like journaling is something that's big right now. I know I just went on a retreat. I was telling Andre I just went on a retreat and I had to it was with my sponsorship family. We had to write a letter to our little selves, right? So I've been in recovery for 19 years, so I had to write a letter to little Kim. And I can't even tell you how cathartic that was for me. So possibly getting into some journaling, maybe getting a book for him if you can. I don't know if you're going into the residential treatment or a peer is going
Yes.
in there to work with this individual. If so, that would be a nice gift to give to this person, to get them started on those emotional regulation skills. That's like one solution a peer can do.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I actually just started working for this gentleman with this gentleman. And you know, when I first met him, it was kind of like a deer in headlights. You know, he's very young. He doesn't really know what you know what direction he wants to go in. He's transitioning to a whole new community where he doesn't know anybody. He doesn't want to go back home because you know that hasn't worked for him, and his supports there are so limited. And then on top of that, the facility that he's at, he can't take his medication that he was prescribed prior to getting there. So he's dealing with that whole dynamic. And so that's where the emotional regulation piece came in, you know, just having a conversation around that, like what would that really look like for him? We hadn't talked about journaling, but I did, you know, talk to him about some other things that we here could offer, some books that we have, some things that we can do, and also, you know, part of the emotional regulation piece for him is simply going to be me coming in to meet with him, you know, once a week, just to have that check in and those conversations and making sure that he's okay, because we're both trying to figure this out together, you know, how he can navigate this system, you know, until he can get back on his meds.
The other part that what you just said, thank you for that. That resonates. And I'm just so encouraged by seeing so many peers on this call who are working in reentry, because what I'm going to share with you is just like Hernandez talked about in carceral settings, the self-worth work begins before people are released. So the self-worth work that you're doing with this gentleman begins before he's sent out of the residential treatment that he's in. So anything that you're bringing to the table is helpful, right? And having the conversations, establishing a rapport, meeting him where he begins, because it sounds like you're doing that instead of meeting him where he's at, you're meeting him where he begins, and that's really great. I think the only other thing is, are there any options for like stipends or any kind of funding that he could be helped with to help pay for his bills?
No, so the way this facility works where he's at is that he'll do 6 months basically of what they call treatment, right? So he's going to cognitive restructuring, life skills, these types of things. And then, and you know, after 6 months, he'll go into 3 months of employment will where they'll take him out, you know, on a van. He'll do an employment search and he'll find a job. And then once he obtains that job, he then becomes responsible for paying to stay at the facility. But at the same time, he will also have to save enough money to, you know, to pay, you know, to pay for transitional housing once he's out, and also, you know, to purchase a vehicle and these kinds of things. And it sounds like a lot, and it is, but you know they have a system where it does work out for individuals, but in the very beginning it can be very overwhelming, especially for a person who really doesn't really have that much confidence, doesn't really know what he's getting into. And you know, but you did say something. So one of the things that I really pride myself on when I'm going to this facility or to the county jail or wherever I'm going, I like to share my experience with people, and I explain to them that, you know, yes, I've been incarcerated. You know, I did almost 2 decades in prison. But the one thing that I always say, and a lot of people hear me say this a lot, and I say it, you know, not because it sounds good, but because it's true. I tell people that even though I've had my own experiences, you know, I don't know what it's like to walk a mile in their shoes. You know, I've been to the shoe store, you know, and probably came out with a pair or two that I didn't pay for, but I would never know what it's like, you know, to walk a mile in their shoes and be them. And that's really where I try to begin. You know, is just, you know, kind of just really letting them know that I respect their individuality. And, you know, just because I've had my own experiences doesn't mean they're going to experience it the same. And just really trying to figure out, you know, how can we work collaboratively together to really help this individual have the best possible outcome, you know, not only just not in the moment, but also, you know, long term.
No, I know that we don't have a lot of time left, but I'd like to say a few things. And first and foremost, Johnny, thank you for your work with him and for introducing him to us and the work that you're doing. I think that that's amazing. There are many people who need mental health medication, not all, but many people who need mental health medication and are unwilling to take it. Sounds like he needs the medication and he's willing to take it. And in the chat, someone asked a question: can advocacy be done so that he can get his medication? I would if he has a formal diagnosis, who did it, who has that paperwork in the formal diagnosis, to try to connect the treatment facility with the external person, psychologist, psychiatrist, clinician who did the diagnosis, and then advocate with that information in front of you on his behalf, right? And I heard you loud and clear when you said he doesn't necessarily know where he wants to go, but that's a piece that he knows that he needs and he wants. And so what he does have, maybe he doesn't understand fully where he wants to go, but he understands where he's been. And the fact that he's staying there is a huge sign of strength. And the fact that you are using your own lived and living experience, leading with empathy, that's what I just heard you say. Because I don't, I know a lot of people who have similar experiences to me. It doesn't mean that I understand exactly what they're going through. I have 30, almost 39 years in recovery. That's different, right? From a young person who's experiencing that for the first time now. And so your strength in terms of being able to recognize that is huge. A lot of people want to tell people what to do, when to do, how to do it. And then when it doesn't work, it's their fault. We need to take responsibility inward and say, okay, what's the best thing here for this person? And your insistence on connecting him to the recovery community is critical. So thank you for everything that you're doing there.
And so I just want to answer that question real quick. So in Texas, the facility that he's at is so they have two versions, right? So the version where he's at, you cannot be on medication. And they'll tell you that when you go to court and sign the paper. And a lot of people, because it's easy to access, they'll go ahead and just get off the medicine so they can get to the facility, get to the program, get out, and get back to life, right? But then they have another program, the same program, where you can be on your medication. It takes a little bit longer to get in, and there's a few more barriers. So sometimes for individuals like this person, they just take what's readily available and then they'll deal with it kind of as it comes. That's kind of the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. We still have 3 minutes. Anyone else in the group who wants to share their experience with someone in a similar situation, or questions for Johnny or for Dr. Hernandez before we do a summary? If not, Dr. Hernandez, I'm going to let you take it away with the summary. And
Once again,
we're closing. Thank you.
Once again, thank you for your participation today. And thank you for the feedback regarding the didactic. And then Johnny, thank you for all the work that you're doing, and everybody else. But you for bringing us into this case. You clearly here, you made some recommendations and some comments that are really important. Rule violations for this person can include prison time, right? And so when we're talking about reentry people and what they have to adhere to, and you just gave us the piece on systems that were not well designed for people to have success. When you take away people's medication that is life-saving, we need to think about how we advocate in relationship to that. I know that the rules are the rules, but there's opportunities for us to do some advocacy in that regard. The pieces that you're talking about around emotional regulation, anger, trauma, these are areas that are similar need of people who are incarcerated, coming out, from people who are in treatment programs in the community, and we need to address all of those as we move forward. connecting people to internal and external recovery capital, which is what I heard you say, right? That internal recovery capital is my ability to act, ability to control my emotions, my ability to regulate emotions and anger, my ability to say yes, to say no, to understand that there's some things that I need to, all of that stuff is internal recovery capital. And then the pieces that you talked about a great deal that are very similar to people in reentry: employment, housing, family reunification, access to the multiple pathways of recovery, knowledge of where there are. Those are external portions of recovery capital that are extremely important, right? With this, as it relates to the summary, I love the quote that you used at the end, right? There from the person working in Texas, and I would add to that: the opposite of addiction is not recovery. The opposite of addiction is connection. That's the piece that you were talking about. So how do we help people to connect? And Johnny, you did this really well with connecting with this person because you have your own lived and living experience in that way. But to the rest of the folks who are here, you don't have to have lived and living experience to connect with people. We need to validate, we need to listen, we need to be there, we need to lead and strive for empathy. We need to do away and suspend judgment and bias. And we do that by participating fully. And then I want to leave you with something that William White has said, leading researcher around issues of recovery in the country. Bill White, encourage you to look out for him. He says recovery can be initiated in treatment, but actually recovery happens in community. In community, right? So what does that look like by way of reintegrating people back into community responsibly and safely, right? We all have a role to play in that. So I want to thank you once again for your participation today. Johnny, for all the work, everything that you've shared with us here, and other folks as well. And Andrea, thank you for the team, wonderful team that folks don't get to hear from, but they help us with getting this together, to reviewing the slides, the content, and everything else. Thank you for all of that.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you to all of you for this great conversation we had today. Please remember to complete the post-session survey, and we'll see you November 16. Remember, we're moving the session 1 week before. We'll see you there. Thank you. Bye.